Thank you. Our next question is from Damsith Wimalasena from Lucy Cavendish College. Thank you.
Hello, Charlie. Thank you for being here. Just before I start with my question, I wanted to address something you said earlier on sort of Western Christian values being the reason for the abolishment of slavery globally. I'm not sure whether you know this. I've seen you repeating this quite often. I'm a practicing Buddhist, and it was actually Buddhist emperors, Emperor Ashoka of India, who first abolished slavery globally. So I would ask you to sort of look at other sort of...
I will look into that. You did it globally? They had that much, the Buddhists had that much span of influence?
Oh, within India.
Okay, I'll look into it. Thank you.
Thank you. So first of all, my first question, or my only question is, you've advocated and applauded the reducing and removing of public funding for universities on the grounds they promote ideological biases. Given that universities play a critical role in driving national innovation, research, and upward mobility, especially through federally funded grants, how do you reconcile this position with the broader societal value that higher education institutes offer?
Well, they can, but in Harvard's case, for example, who's getting their funding pulled, they have a $50 billion endowment. Just so we are clear, in pounds, that would be like what, 42 billion, 45 billion? I mean, I'm trying to learn the conversion rate here. I mean, it's an extraordinary amount of money. They can either use their endowments to fund it, and if you have certain behavior and certain practices, then you should not get federal funding. Harvard is in direct violation of the United States Supreme Court fair admissions case, which says you cannot discriminate people based on the color of their skin. Go ahead.
But isn't the whole point of it, you can't use endowments like that. The point of
they can.
The point of an endowment is to manage a fund through perpetuity. Cambridge has an endowment, and that endowment allows professorships to be funded to allow for research into sciences. That's the whole point of an endowment.
Hold on, you just said it funds research into sciences. That's what they should do with their monstrosity of an endowment.
Yeah, but the endowment is...
The interest alone on their endowment could fund the entire research and development budget of most Ivy League schools. They have a $50 billion endowment. Even like a podunk money manager in America can earn a 7 to 10% investment in the markets the last couple of years. That's $5 billion of returns that endowment could then reinvest in whatever they want. Instead, Harvard has become a hedge fund with a radical school attached. And I think that's very wrong for US taxpayers to continue to subsidize.
But it's not just Harvard. You've called on colleges being a scam. You've constantly attacked higher education institutes. You've attacked liberal arts as a scam. For example, like a lot of conservatives, Peter Thiel studied philosophy at Stanford. Ronald Reagan studied sociology. A lot of them did study liberal arts, and you keep undermining these august institutions, which have provided a lot for society. Like society's backbones have been universities and higher learning institutes, and yet you keep attacking them.
Well, they used to be largely, but again, I don't want to speak too much about this country, but in America, they don't represent fundamental American values. You know, Peter Thiel, after he graduated Stanford, wrote an entire book criticizing college and then paying people not to go to college. So Peter Thiel, who spoke at this very school, and you guys had a great conversation with him, do you know that he believes college is such a scam? He would pay people $100,000 a year for 20 years straight not to go to college. So not exactly a good argument in your favor. Peter Thiel, who got a philosophy degree, made billions of dollars, and has now forked over tens of millions of dollars for people not to go to US universities and colleges.
Yeah, but it's not just Peter Thiel.
I know, but you mentioned him, I didn't. But to complete the point is that...
As Thomas went to, did liberal arts.
Look, in America, there are far too many people going to college. We need people to become welders, electricians, people that work with their hands. There is a major trade deficit problem in the United States. We have 11 million well-paying jobs that we cannot find enough labor for, and instead we have a lot of people going to university to go study North African lesbian poetry. It might sound good, but it doesn't necessarily, A, either development, the content, the character, or the development of the soul, and B, it does not necessarily also give you the skills necessary. Some college is good for you. I'm a big proponent of Hillsdale College.
Guys, can you please be quiet?
I believe Hillsdale College is America's greatest college, and I'm a big proponent of that. But I would ask a question. In your own words, what do you believe the purpose of college is?
It's critical engagement. But coming back to your point on lesbian poetry or whatever.
North African lesbian poetry.
North African lesbian poetry. So in the morning, I actually had a lecture on development policy. And one of the key authors on sort of development economics is Nussbaum, who talks about how liberal arts sort of engages you critically. And one could argue, even North African lesbian poetry, I don't think that's a degree, I think that's just a module within a degree.
Maybe.
Yeah. That makes you
The fact you don't know shows how rotten to the core universities have become.
You're taking one example and telling conservatives and hordes of young people that college is a scam. College isn't a scam. I mean, I took my mom down to a pub just down the road where Watson and Crick announced DNA.
Guys, can we, okay, wait one second.
If college is a scam, then DNA wouldn't have been discovered. With cancer research.
Yes, hold on a second. Yes, you're right. At this specific university, you guys split the atom. You had Sir Isaac Newton. You had some of the greatest minds of the West. I don't know about what's happening here, and I'm not going to criticize it. But at most colleges in the West, they've gone away from places of inquiry and appreciation of what is good and what is beautiful and into this incessant oppression Olympics of trying to deconstruct the core canon that is our birth certificate. I don't know if that's happening here. It's certainly...
That's not true, though.
In America, it is objectively true, okay?
That isn't true.
Again, no, first of all, they removed Western civilization as a core course in Stanford in the 1990s. They tried to bring it back with petitions, and the university said, no, teaching Western civilization is racist. Shakespeare is not taught at major... let me finish. Shakespeare is not taught at major universities across America because it's deemed as racist. I talked to some students earlier in the English department, and they said, hey, I'm studying Shakespeare. I said, that's refreshing because in a lot of U.S. schools, they don't teach Shakespeare because he's called racist. You would be surprised at how wretched to the core some of these colleges have become in America.
If you look at the Global Innovation Index, America, which is predominantly a lot of their majors are in humanities and liberal arts, they're number 2 on the Global Innovation Index. China is somewhere near 13. If you look at every metric, Fortune 1000 CEOs, 40% did humanities and liberal arts. There is a value in liberal arts, yet you're criticizing it.
And I'm going to keep on criticizing it. Also, the vast majority of liberal arts graduates do not respect freedom of speech. That is an empirical poll. They increasingly do not have reverence or gratitude for the United States of America. They don't care about the core values of the U.S. Constitution. If you want to go to college, that's fine. But in our country, 40% of kids that enter college do not graduate. The kids that do graduate, half of them end up getting jobs that do not require any sort of college degree. There are all these made-up degrees. In America, I know it's different than the experience you might be having here. Your tutoring system here is objectively great. I'm glad you guys have it. The class sizes in America are 400 to 500 students, sometimes per introductory course, to go hundreds of thousands of dollars into debt, study things that don't matter, to find jobs that do not exist. And so let me just make one final point, is that, of course, some people should be going to college. But generally in the United States of America, it has become a racket of debt. It has become a burden and a place where we're actually not putting our best and brightest into the job field itself to be equipped for the jobs of the future. Instead, we have a lot of baristas at Starbucks with philosophy degrees.
You also mentioned indoctrination. As per the Oxford Dictionary's definition of indoctrination, it means that you take a belief and you can't critically observe that belief. Turning Point USA has over 30,000 chapters, 3,000 chapters across US universities. So are you arguing that students, including conservatives, lack the critical thinking skills to sort of decide political ideologies, political beliefs, that they're so dumbfounded that they can't decide for themselves what's right and what's wrong, and that your whole premise is on the fact that students like us, we lack critical thought in deciding what is taught in schools?
Again, I'm not using Cambridge as the school that I think of, but in America, we have millions of people that go to these massive state schools that have humanities departments that are not reading the great books, that do not have a tutoring system, that are unfortunately laced with the most anti-Western thought imaginable. I don't really quite following what one thing has to do with the other, why 3,000 chapters has something to do with your indictment. Maybe you can clarify, but I think we're out of time.
You can clarify, but then we'll move on.
In general, colleges should be a place that lift you up to what is good, true, and beautiful. To study the great things that have been, to develop your soul and develop your character. Character in Greek literally means like tattoo, to etch within you. Far too often, colleges create ungrateful, pessimistic, and nihilistic revolutionaries that want to tear down what was before and instead have no alternative to build the future, and the West is suffering because of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I disagree, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
And few have been more dedicated to defending that future than Charlie Kirk, who's been on the front lines of this battle for years.
You even graduate college? You know,
No.
you know
In
this
fact,
guy didn't graduate college?
I didn't go to college. I've been able to be pretty successful without a four-year degree.
College.
Yeah, I did not go to
You're
college.
going to come to college and act like you know.
So
better
are we
than
gonna
everybody?
debate resumes or ideas?
Ideas.
Most college degrees are meaningless, and most of you guys are being totally scammed by being here.
No.
Now, let me further complete the point.
So getting educated is a scam.
First of all, it's not always an education, and you are perfect evidence that you haven't really been educated. What have you actually learned at this institution except that you're the center of the world and everyone must listen to you?
This week, I caught up with Charlie at Texas A&M on his American Comeback Tour to discuss what needs to be done today in order to ensure a stronger tomorrow. Well, Charlie, we're here on the campus of Texas A&M. Tell us what's about to happen here, what you're doing here, because you're doing this all over the country on different college campuses.
I've been doing this for 12 years, as you know, going to college campuses, trying to spread the word of conservatism and patriotism and liberty. And the last couple of years, we've just seen our crowds and the enthusiasm skyrocket. And I have to give President Trump such enormous credit for that. They're here to have conversation, to hear the other side, because understand that most of these college campuses are very predominantly liberal. And when a conservative now comes on campus, they want to hear the other perspective.
You're doing it all over the country because you've actually called colleges indoctrination factories.
Yes.
What did you mean by that, and how do we fix it?
Look, indoctrination factories, I mean by that is that they believe diversity is everyone looks different but thinks the same. Our conservative students on campuses, they don't feel as if they feel as if they speak out for their belief system, that they'll be graded down or they'll be smeared or slandered. Just recently, we had many Turning Point USA students be physically confronted and physically violated. For example, in Dallas, we had this happen. We had this at University of California, Davis, where our Turning Point group was actually attacked by an Antifa group. Universities are not about the pursuit of knowledge. They're about the forceful pushing of a left-wing worldview, and we're here to shake it up.
So many people look at what you're doing and say it's very important to give conservatives a space on these college campuses so they feel like they actually have an ability to speak out and they feel, like they're among people with like-minded ideas.
Totally. And increasing what we find at Turning Point USA is that we are more than half of the body politic now on campus. These universities are actually now out of alignment with their very students. It used to be when I first started this over a decade ago, it was universities liberal, students liberal. Okay, now it's okay, universities liberal, students not so liberal. Students leaning more conservative, which is just a promising sign.
Charlie, you've been willing to sit down with people who have differing views from you. You're willing to take questions at these events you have from any and everyone.
That's right. Well, free speech is our birthright as Americans. When you have free speech, we're going to get closer to the truth, closer to the best way to govern, closer to the best polity for the country. And here in college campuses, they're not places of free speech. They are islands of totalitarianism. And these students are just begging to see a collision of ideas. They want to see what is a conservative versus a liberal. Have I not heard the other side? And so I've sat down with Bill Maher. I've sat down with Gavin Newsom. I sit down with a lot of liberals here on campus. And you learn a lot about the other side. You learn to see if we have common ground. And sometimes we really don't have common ground. The left does not believe in freedom of speech. They believe in the clamping down of other ideas. They believe in censorship. We believe that all ideas should be heard, and we believe because of that, our ideas will win. What
do you make of Bill Maher and people very similar to Bill Maher actually thinking more like Charlie Kirk than maybe we ever imagined we'd see?
I take no credit for it. And to his credit, he was always intellectually against the woke regime at great consequence. And so, sitting down with him in the podcast was quite honestly, a lot of fun. It was great.
You had more moral courage than pastors that I know that went along with the woke crazy train. And you deserve credit for that because it was of high cost.
Until we get rid of that, they're never going to win another election.
I agree.
We have much different worldviews when it comes to Christianity and religion. We talked about that in a very spirited fashion, but that's what America is all about. It should be where people that have different religious beliefs, different political beliefs 90% of the time can still sit down and have a cordial discussion and conversation. I believe that's how America is going to heal.
Do you think 2024 marked the end of the old Democrat Party?
I don't know where they are. I mean, AOC and Bernie Sanders are flying all over the country. They're trying to do their whole, fighting oligarchy tour. And I'm not even sure where the base of the Democrat Party is. The equivalent of this would be if Democrats in the election cycle were able to go to deep red areas and be able to draw these types of crowds and this type of support. They're not. And so what we see is in areas where Democrats used to win with 80%, 90% of the vote, it's become much more competitive, and that massive movement has resulted in President Trump's triumphant victory in November. They should learn, first and foremost, don't run on an agenda that's against American values. It seems like they're actually doubling and tripling down on these incredibly unpopular radical positions that they've been presenting to the American people. I would love to see the Democrat Party at least moderate, because it's better for the country, actually. Because at some point we might not be in power. They're obsessed with DEI. They're obsessed with the racial tribalization of this country. And that stuff was resolutely defeated on the ballot box. There was a referendum.
Are there things that you think that parents should still be aware of that are going on in their kids' classrooms that maybe we aren't aware of right now?
Even though the country has moved significantly to the right, a lot of these classrooms and a lot of the curriculum have not adjusted. So you have to be on the lookout for inappropriate curriculum. The hyper-racialization or the race obsession is still being taught to kids all across the country. So parents have to be vigilant, they have to be involved, and we see it here on these campuses, the outgrowth and the consequence of what happens when we don't actually engage in the K through 12 fight. But I think parents are really starting to wake up. An unattended blessing out of COVID were millions of families that started to ask critical questions about what their kids were learning, and also taking their kids out of some of these public schools and these government-run schools and homeschooling or putting them in better private schools.
There are some out there who argue that conservatives are behind culturally. You've actually said that online you feel like conservatives are ahead of the game. What do you mean by that?
I think that we're actually winning when it comes to Gen Z, when it comes to TikTok has been really helpful for this. It's President Trump that led the way. He showed the example of what it's like to engage and to reach out to the younger generation. The MAGA hat went from a symbol of poison on campus, where radioactivity. It's a symbol of patriotism and of hope and one of connectivity and purpose. And so I do think that we're starting to win the cultural battle. I think a lot of Democrats are realizing that. We have a lot of work to do. What we are doing right here will dictate an election 5 years from now. It will determine an election 10 years from now. We at Turning Point believe that elections are effects. We want to be the cause.
What do we think is going to happen in 2028? What do we think is going to happen down the line when President Trump is no longer on the ballot?
It's hard to predict or conjecture that far out, but that's why we're also going as hard as we can right now. We are doing more campus stops this semester than even during the election. President Trump is not going to be able to carry us all in 2028. We're trying to keep the movement going, because in some ways, if we just kind of closed up shop, we said, we'll do this again in 2028, where does all this energy go? Right. Where does all this enthusiasm go? So we want to build this up and actually have no dip in energy and actually have this be a year-over-year continuation of President Trump's triumph in November.
Yes, we know the cornerstone is Christ alone, our hope now forever.